Good morning. Ayin Beis, the last page 1477. Now, we've been here before, just for the record, when we began learning all of this, and then we went to learn some other texts to help support and understand the ideas that we're learning here. And namely, we learned the Torah Shalom, which is very relevant, as I shall explain. We learned the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe in Torah Mi Kashem Elokeinu HaMagbiel L'Sheves, its explanation, and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which we're in the middle of. And we will get back to after we finish this. And specifically, we reach page 384 of the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. And the topic is Achdus. Appreciating and understanding the divine unity within all of existence, which is an accomplishment because existence on its own, as we see, 8 billion people on this planet, pretty much follow their own agenda. Everybody has their life, and the life is driven by self-interest. It's not always a bad thing, but it could lead to bad things. But understanding the unity that God is really the driving force behind everything. And more than the driving force, the reality of everything is really the appreciation of Achdus Hashem, what he calls mitzvah liyachid, to miyachid and see that oneness everywhere. And the challenge is how do we transform a perspective that sees me first and God at best second, to seeing God as first and we as an extension of that. So it's essentially looking at everything from the other way around. Instead of seeing existence coming and then finding out how did existence get here, it's understanding the source of all of existence and seeing existence as an extension and somewhat a creation of that source. It's like the story I've told a number of times, the debate that you had between a philosopher and a mystic and a chassid. And they were debating the existence of God. You know, the debates back and forth, back and forth. Finally, the chassid says to the philosopher, he says, you know, I envy you. I envy you because you think about God all the time. And to be very frank, I think about myself all the time. That's what the chassid said to the philosopher. The philosopher was very flattered by this compliment that the great chassid is telling him. And and with that they part ways, and he's bragging and to his friends and to others and to say, you know, this great chassid you all respect. He says, I think about God all the time. And he thinks about himself. Anyway, the years passed. Either he came to his, either he matured and came to understand on his own, or he was enlightened by others that actually the chassid insulted him in a very subtle way. He was saying, you think about God all the time because you know you exist. You don't have to give it thought. It's a given for you. Your reality, your given reality is that you exist. So for you, you think about, does God exist? Is there a God? Where is this God? What type of God? And the back and forth, back and forth. For the chassid, God is a reality, is a given reality. He doesn't have to think about it. So he doesn't think about it. He thinks, since God is the given reality, he thinks about himself. Do I exist? Why do I exist? What's my purpose? Why did God put me here? So you see, it's not just a matter of semantics. It's a matter of a very different way of looking at reality. I mean, I'm not sure who coined this expression that we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, but we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. This is even more than spiritual beings. That we are essentially ambassadors of God in this world to fulfill a purpose and a mission. It's a very different way of looking at life than when looking at life the other way around, that I'm here and now I have to figure out, is there a God or there's no God, or what does God want from me, and so on. Now, obviously, we begin from the bottom up. First, we start with ourselves and we climb upward. That's what we said, das tachten, yechudet tata, I exist, and now I'm trying to figure out what my purpose is. But ultimately, when you talk Mamayla Lamata, you talk what he said from the perspective, not from Ishtalshal's perspective, from the perspective of Atzmus, it's the other way around. God is reality. And we are the novelty, so to speak. Elikus bepshitis. Elikus is the given. And Elimus is bischachus, is the novelty that is created by Elikus. That's ultimately appreciating true yichud. Now, in that yichud itself, we've learned there's levels. There's yichud tata, yichud elah, and then there's the joining of the two, which we're now going to learn about more in detail. We've already learned about it, but we'll learn. He's going to spell it out. And considering that from Atzmus' point of view, the whole idea of creation is simply another Atzmus, so to speak, product. Just like God can produce light that reflects the infinite power of the divine, he can produce light that associates with the yesh and creates a yesh. Like he said, it's just another Ratzon Atzmus. And in God's desire, these are equal. They're all encompassed in his source. So existence, like he said, from that point of view, we learned, from the existence point of view, everything is just an extension of godliness, he says. Everything is encompassed within the etzem. I just want to see the exact lashon. I want to find the exact expression of something. He says like this. Yeah, there it is. The two Tsenis, for the Eir higher than Kalim and the Eir and Kalim, Almid is Kasi, Almid is Galia, the hidden worlds and the revealed worlds. But then there was another expression I wanted to see here. Oh, the bottom of the page, 1476, where he said, that even in Biyah, even though Biyah is not one with the divine, it's not Iyu v'chayu echad v'yu v'gamu echad, but from God's perspective, the ayin of the yesh of Bria, of Biyah, is just like it is the way the Kelim are in Atzilus. From his point of view. From his point of view. To the point that everything is the way God envisions existence. So when you think of it that way, that the reality is God and existence is the novelty, existence is the add-on, so to speak. So then existence is the way God envisions it. Now, we don't see it that way, but that's how God sees it. And in that context, he called Inyan Habriya b'chinas galus bilvad. From that point of view, Bria is not a creation, really. Bria is just revealing what God envisioned. Think of an architect as a vision of a certain type of building he wants to build. Within him, it's all part of his vision, which is united with the rest of him. It's all part of who he is. Then, when he actualizes it, so it says galus, he reveals, he said, Gili, that what he had in his core essence now is coming out in an expressed way. And all his galus batzmuse, keina sheikh klal yitziv his galus chus la'atzmuse. Because from that perspective, everything is all being seen from the perspective from within. It's like if you're able to look at the world from within your very core soul, you're seeing all of existence as something that is extending from within. We're talking now the Creator seeing it that way. And that's where we stopped, on top of page 1477. I wanted to address a question that I was asked. I know Yitzchak is not in the class right now, he's traveling, but he texted me, he wanted me to answer this question, which I thought is a good question and very fitting into the context that is pretty obvious, even though the question is obvious, even though I believe I did address it, but it's still worthwhile reviewing again. The question is this: if this indeed is the case, that existence from our perspective, there's a yesh that slowly begins to acclimate itself and learn about godliness and so on. So that's understandable. But from God's perspective, how do you account for the issue of evil? What about evil in this world? You know, you see, let's say in the current war, brutal atrocities being perpetrated, crime, violence. What happens with all of that? That's also part of existence. How does God see that? He sees it from his eyes, it's all good, based on this perspective. So it's a very legitimate question. So let me answer that just briefly. You may recall I keep speaking about two tracks. One is how the relationship between existences and the creator, the product and the producer. And we talked, it's yesh ma'ayin, there's nothing common among them. It doesn't affect God because it's only from a reflection. And all the other levels, we talked about yichud, yesh ma'ayin, then we talked about how there's the two levels of ayin, but from God's perspective, both are the same. It's only the parsa and the tzimtzum that separates between the two. That's been what we've been discussing until now. Then there's the discussion, what about our mitzvahs? What about good deeds that we do? And for that matter, bad deeds. The evil that we do. Where does that fit into the picture? Does that impact God or not? So I explained that that's a different track. That's the track of Avodah. What we're talking is the dynamics of creation. That we as an existing creation need to understand that creation is completely nullified and united from God's point of view. We're not talking here about free will and our avodah, whether for good or the opposite, God forbid. That is another track. That introduces something else that God said, in this world that I created, that is completely, from my point of view, just an extension of me, I also created a concealment. Remember, the parsa and the tzimtzum are also created by God. And that concealment can lead people to go the other direction. Instead of discovering the truth, that the truth of our existence is really a godly existence, like we're learning here, that it's all united with, from God's perspective, how he sees existence, we could also go the other direction, God forbid, where we give in to the concealment and we convince ourselves there is no God, or at least not for this moment. And we can then perpetrate the worst possible crimes against each other, or even if not the worst, any crime. That's a whole other picture. That's the concealment. That's a result of the concealment that God created. So when that happens, that's where God is now. We're not talking about God as he is sustaining existence. There, God is allowing for a certain space and room for the independent reality that we are to make choices. Now, is God there in those choices as well? He's there. But there he removes himself. And you cannot say that's what free will means. He removes himself in the sense, not that he's not there, but not only is he not affected by it, he's actually allowing us to behave in that fashion. In other words, the power of concealment allows, let's go back to the student and the teacher. The teacher conceals his intelligence in order for the student to be able to understand. So there's a parsa, a tzimtzum and a parsa that allows for the student to exist and the student to understand the idea on his terms. From the teacher's point of view, everything is all one. It's all encompassed within his source, but he's given room now for the student. Let's say the student decides to leave. He doesn't want to listen to the teacher. He says, you know what? Since I'm an independent consciousness, an independent entity, I want to go off, wander off. God allows that. So that introduces a whole other department, which is not how God creates existence, but what happens when existence decides to wander off the reservation and not follow the guidelines. And that is also allowed by God. So there we have to have a whole other discussion, how God is present even in that evil. But it's not part of this discussion. And as a matter of fact, just to point out a few things, when he talked about this on page 14, I believe 14, was it 61? Let me just see. No. That was later. 1 second. We spoke about this point. My 1 second. Yeah, page 1471. So he said, this is due to Maisa Tachtenim. That's a whole other picture that God chose to give power to the creation that's completely nullified in his presence. He chose to give us a piece of himself, which means free will and the ability to defy him. So that's another discussion, how that relates to God's higher unity. And in fact, what that means is that we have the power to actually conceal that unity and behave contrary to it. And that's God's power. He gave us that ability. And yet, we also have the power to transform that concealment. And that's the piece that talks about Ein Oid. We're not talking about revealing the divine in existence. That is what we're learning here, is about revealing this higher unity even in existence. But then there's the transformation of the very concealment that God created. And that takes me back all the way to a line that he says that I think is a very critical line on page 1349. At the bottom, he says that what we talked about, Ein Oid, that the Etzem Keli is a separate discussion, because we're not talking about revealing godliness within existence. Then we're talking about revealing the divine power in the very concealment. And that's where I would say is the place that we talk about evil and darkness. That the only way to understand that is that God is there even in the place where he's completely concealed, even in the darkest place, because he created that concealment, which allowed for that evil to happen. So it's not that God caused the evil, but he definitely created an environment where it could happen. And you have to say that's Ein, that there's the power of the Hela Ma'atzmi even there. But that's a different discussion when we're learning here. What we're learning here is far more about revealing the divine in a world that doesn't see it initially. When you're talking about dealing with darkness and evil to the point of evil, there you have to then invoke a whole other element of tshuva, of the idea of transforming concealment to express the divine concealment. This is the general way I would explain it all. And that's another discussion of how the concealment devolves as well to allow for room for us to make that, for us to err and sin in that context. It's just like when you leave room for that student, when you leave room for an independent entity, they can go the other direction. But here he's talking about the yichud when you're not going the other direction, where you're trying to reveal the divine true reality in existence. So for evil to be part of that, you would have to have an element of tshuva and an element of correcting those wrongs, because those wrongs definitely create more distance between divine unity and our existence. I just wanted to add that into the equation here. Okay. Now, if anybody has any questions, please. If not, we shall continue learning on top of page 1477.
Rabbi, it sounds a lot like the difference between avodas hatzadikim and avodas abalei tshuva. And like the story you mentioned before, you take elikus b'pshitus and oilus b'yischadshus, or the verkehrt.
Absolutely. That's exactly correct. That the Baal Tshuva, for a person who, for example, has defied God, has gone the other direction. A tzaddik, his job is to reveal the divine unity within all of existence. But a Baal Tshuva, before he did Tshuva, went the other direction. Not getting to whether it's deliberate or not deliberate or tinik shenishba, but bottom line, he's not been living like, let's talk about the Chet Eitzadas, for example, like he says in Basel Legani. It introduced a distance because it's going against God's will. So the only way to reveal divine unity there is through tshuva, because the divine unity cannot exist together with evil. Like it says in the Gemara, for example, God and an arrogant person, there's no room for both of us, because the whole idea of Kedusha is bittul. If you don't have bittul, if you're following your own animal soul's desires, you're not going to have a revealed godliness within you. So the only way to reveal divine unity there is by doing tshuva, and what we call zdeinus nasalei kazach is shvirasan zui takanasan. By true remorse, you can transform by breaking the evil, by regretting it, and then using the energy that using that darkness as a catalyst to create a deeper love and a deeper thirst, like he says, tzama lecha nafshi. The arid thirst, the thirst that's created from the distance from God, that itself becomes a springboard, a catalyst to get closer to God. Then you're revealing divine unity even in the darkness. So it's correct. Exactly what you're saying is correct. By the other approach, the Kasadik's approach is more Mamaila Mata, where he's revealing the divine, well, it's Mamata Lamaila, but it's essentially revealing divine unity in everything you do. But as soon as you go into the world of darkness, you have to do something about it. And then the Helam itself, that concealment, that temporary concealment, reveals also a power of the divine to conceal himself, like we learned. So it is a different track. Yeah. Yeah. So let's continue. Third line on page 1477. The pages, if you're following, can be seen at ayinbeis.com. We have all the PDF scans of these pages. So he says like this: V'yuvan zeh. This idea from God's perspective, even existence is all part of how God envisions existence. And I'll emphasize again, when a person sins, that's not how God envisioned existence. He envisioned existence the way he wants it to be. Think of an artist created the art aligned with his vision. If somebody comes and takes the art and defiles it or distorts it or uses it for their own purpose, that's not what God envisioned. That's not what the artist wanted. That's already the second track we're talking about, the track of Avodah, Ma'aseh Tachtenim, where we have the power to mess it up. Neshamas and Atzilus or Biyah or Malachim don't have that power. We have that power. But that requires a different discussion, how you deal with Achdus Hashem there. But Achdus Hashem, God envisioning existence, he says we'll understand this with the mashal that he gave back on 2 pages back. Remember the mashal of the teacher. He said the brilliant teacher has his ideas. He also has within him, before he begins to communicate, what it will teach to the student. It's all part of his seichel, but it's not obvious yet. So now he's going back to that mashal to understand how God sees everything from God's perspective. He says, "Yuvan zeb commission is barely ill baha mashal." Like it was explained earlier, the mashal on page 1475, the Mashpia Mekabel. So we had the example of a Mashpia, a transmitter, and a recipient, a teacher and student. The Mashpia harigam bechetzenius haseichel. Also in his outer, his more superficial, if you wish, his more surface level of understanding, meaning the seichel that he's going to convey to the student, meir etzle kol hapnimius. Even in that, even when he's teaching A, B, C, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and the student is only receiving a very, like the tip of the iceberg, for the teacher, it's not the tip of the iceberg. For the teacher, it's all part of the whole iceberg. It's all part of the idea as he understands it. So I'll just give an example. We know that the word, the Aleph, you teach an Aleph, a child, it's Aleph, right? Aleph. What is that? It's simply the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, like A. Then you teach him Beis. From the student's point of view, he's only learning one Aleph. But we all know that Aleph is not just an Aleph. The Aleph is part of a whole alphabet. And the Aleph, when it'll be combined with other words, it'll create an idea. And that idea conveys even deeper ideas. So the Aleph that you teach the child, like the Frierdiker Rebbe says, is the Aleph of Anoichi, the first word of the 10 Commandments. The Aleph encompasses the whole word Anoichi, I, God. Anoichi encompasses the whole verse, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha asher tzisichem eretz Mitzrayim. I am the God that took you out of Egypt. That first verse encompasses all positive mitzvahs, which in turn encompass the whole 10 Commandments, which encompass the whole Torah, which encompass the whole oral Torah. So the Aleph, that one Aleph, from the student's point of view, it's just an Aleph, it's a letter, simple letter. But in it is concentrated like one cell of a conceived new life, is concentrated all the cells that will develop from it. So from the student's point of view, it's chitzenius. It's only an outer dimension. But from the teacher's point of view, he sees the whole pnimius within it. When he says Aleph, he knows that Aleph is a letter from a word Anoichi and encompasses everything that it encompasses. And all the words that the Aleph will be part of, which is really all of the, not every word has an Aleph in it, but every word is made up of letters. So by him, it's all encompassed, made it say kol hapnimius. One second. Yeah. V'im kain, and that's the case. So from that context, the chitzenius, the outer dimension of his seichel, is not at all separate from his inner dimension. It's only from the recipient's point of view that way, not from his point of view. So then what does the chitzenius mean for him? It's more revealed. In other words, the pnimius itself is more concealed because it's all within the essence. But when he's going to express it to a student and he's going to say aleph, or he's going to say a simple phrase or a simple idea, it comes out bizgalus yeser. Like he said, so Bria, when God envisioned existence, so it's chitzenius compared to God himself, because existence is the outer dimension, but within him it's all part of his being, but it's coming to an expression, like the architect is envisioning what building he wants to build. So on one hand, it's all part of his consciousness. On the other hand, it's come out revealed, this is the building I want. So it has a certain element of revelation in it. Not revelation, that's not a revelation in God, it's a revelation as it's going outward. It's like speech, that in thought, the idea is still somewhat amorphous. But when you're ready to speak it and say it, the words themselves are bringing out the idea in a more revealed manner, meaning a more tangible, a more defined manner. Okay, that's what he says. So that's the example that he's giving. That creation, from God's point of view, is like the aleph, is like the chitzenius haseichel from the teacher's point of view. It's all part of the pnimius. Only thing is, it's more bizgalus, it's more expressed, so to speak, because he's expressing it to another that can understand it. In this case, the student. In the case of the example of the moral, is the case of creation. Now, let me stop. Any questions on that, what we just read? So this parenthesis, when we learned it the first time, is also somewhat very subtle. So I'll go slowly and explain now. Rebbe Rashab, it's very clearly very dense topic here. So he's adding something now. He's going to say v'yeser masim lazeh in the parentheses. What's more fitting here, in other words, this example of the Mashpia Mekabel works, but he's going to say something like a qualification that would work even better in this example. That's better than the example. In other words, the example has some limitations. He says what's more fitting here to understand how it is above is Iliyat Suir. That's an expression you use. Imagine. Iliyat Suir, if you could be mitzayed, if you could imagine. Meaning it's not reality, it's just really an exercise in imagination. Sheyin nikra chitzeni is bli salma sa'er ba'atzmei. So here's the thing. Let me explain before I read on. With a teacher and student example, the only way that chitzenius comes out more revealed is by the teacher having to conceal the brilliance behind it. In other words, if you want to teach a student aleph, you can't tell him everything inside the aleph. The anoichi Hashem Elokecha, everything an aleph represents. The word the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and everything that comes with it. That you have to keep quiet about. The teacher has to conceal that. Not as a secret. It's simply too overwhelming. So you have to conceal in order to reveal, basically. To reveal to a lower level that entity, the idea, you have to conceal the pnimius haseichel, so the chitzenius haseichel to emerge. With God, that doesn't make sense. He doesn't have to conceal. Who's he concealing from? Yes, he has to conceal the light in order for creation to emerge. That's why there's a tzimtzum. But how does it work inside himself? When he's envisioning existence, does he have to conceal the rest of himself to envision existence? A teacher does. A teacher has to put aside or somewhat allow to recede all the brilliance, because I'm now going to just teach the aleph. With Hashem, he's saying we have to be mitzayir. Imagine if you were able to see the chitzenius bli hisalma sa'er ba'atzmei, without concealing the earth from yourself. In other words, God sees the whole picture, far beyond just the envisioning of existence. So by a teacher and student, even the teacher has to do some form of concealing within himself to be able to say, I'm now going to communicate the word aleph without adding anything to it. By the Eibush, they're saying you have to say Ili Yitzur. What's more fitting is imagine if you can see the outer dimension without concealing the rest of it. So then it's not nivdal, it's not separate. By the teacher and student, the teacher, there's still something not completely separate. It's all part of who he is, but something has happened, some shift. With Atzmus, what he says, now, Lakus, it's not the case. So you'd only have is that he's revealing a part of himself, only a part of himself, without concealing the rest. So it's like he's identifying. Think of an artist who can have infinite way. He can create infinite types of art, but he's chosen one. But by artist, he has to conceal the others. He can't do it all. Here he's saying, imagine you didn't have to conceal, and you're just expressing one of your infinite possibilities. That's what I think he's adding in the parentheses, which is a very subtle point, but he's trying to say that there's no real Hisalmus either. In other words, it's actually one, because this one expression is just an extension of all the expressions. That's what it sounds to me like he's saying. I would be open to hear other interpretations, but that's what it sounds like he's saying here in this parentheses. I hope that's clear. Okay.
By a teacher, there is another entity that he wants to give over his opinion to the other entity. But the Eibishter, there's nobody else.
But after the Tzimtzum, he will conceal. That's correct. But the main point here is that the concealment does not affect him. That's what's bothering me a bit, because why do you need to say this? We know the concealment doesn't affect him. Just like the concealment doesn't affect the teacher, but I guess by a teacher, it does affect him to some extent. Yeah. It must affect him like... I need more iyun in this. I don't have it fully figured out, because it also bothers me because the Rebbe speaks in Memhei, Tovshe Memhei, about the Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin. So it sounds like when the Eibishter moves from Gili Er La'atzmei to Gili Er L'Zulosei, Er Hashayach La'elamis, even though it's one, because they're both, like he said, it's one Rotzen for both levels of Ayin, of both elements. Maybe, so there, it seems like it's going down a level. I think it may be another thing I would add here, that in other Maimonim, it may be explained differently. In other Maimonim, you could explain that the Ayin, the second Ayin is Ayin Ma'ayin. It's like first God chose to create art. And then from all that art, all the infinite possibilities, he chose one. That would sound like Ayin Ma'ayin, not Ayin from the Yesh Amiti. However, in this Maimer, he's making it very clear that the choice to create existence as it is originates in the same place as the choice to create art altogether, meaning all the possibilities. It's not like one possibility is emerging from all the possibilities, because the Rotzen to Er Gili La'atzmei and the Rotzen to Er Shayach La'elamis, he said, is the same, is coming from the same Atzmos. It basically both originate in the Yesh Amiti, and therefore they're both the same level of ayin, even though it's two different ritzenos. So I think he may be explaining it differently here than in other places. And maybe that's what this parenthesis comes to also emphasize. So it's revealing another dimension. He's revealing how he envisions existence, but it's not a nivdal. It's not separate from. That may be an additional point, or maybe not. The main thing is not nivdal. That's the key thing here. He does not want it to be havdalah, because he wants ardus. He wants an ardus. The rotzen, he says again, the rotzen, the two ritzenis. Second. These gilim in the etzem, and basically is gili er. So, yes. Definitely a very high level of yichud here. The main focus he wants to say, the main thing he wants to say is that it's not ayin ma'ayin. It's both ayins are coming from the yesh amiti. And there's two levels of that ayin. And before the Havdalah, they were encompassed together, and the Havdalah, the Tzimtzum, separates them. But before the Havdalah, they're not separate. Yeah.
Is galus to who?
Doesn't matter to whom. It's just the fact that it's becoming more defined. In other words, Shir Asme B'Kayach, even if there's no one there, the architect is defining for himself what kind of world he wants. 10 spheres, for example. And before that, the Eibishter doesn't need that Gili. The Gili is really a Gili La'atzme of what's going to come, basically. Because he wants it to ultimately be expressed. Remember, Atzmus doesn't need any of this, but he wants an oyer, he wants an expression of what he wants it to come into some Itzias Nimtza. That's how I understand it, yeah.
You mentioned before
Remember, from this is
Mem-Hey.
Galus, 1 second, from this is Galus will then be a Tzimtzum that will turn a Kav, and then the Gili will be La Zulas. Meanwhile, there's no Zulas. But this Galus, even lifting at Tzimtzum, is beginning to set the stage for another reality that will emerge after the Tzimtzum. It's like the teacher preparing himself. He's ready preparing what he's going to say, even though the student isn't yet there, or he's not communicating it yet, but he has brought it forth. It's not just be'etzem neshama shalei. It's come from etzem into some form of expression. That's the key thing to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, but by teacher, yeah. By the Eibishter, even after the Tzimtzum, who is the Zulas?
You and I, ultimately. We're not created yet. But the
this
Zulas
is all
means
expression of him.
Listen, it's very simple. Koydem HaTzimtzum, the Eitz Chaim says, right? There's no room for anything. Now he's created space. So no one's in the space yet until he creates it. But there is a chol l'mokum panei of an independent consciousness is now allowed. And then start ak. And then we'll go the ishtalshlus of akudim, nekudim, vrudim, as it keeps going. So, but you've created the mokim elements. You've created, if you don't have, like a bocher that's living eined mulvade, and he's not ready for anybody else in his life, he's not ready to go dating, right? He's not ready to marriage. You have to first have a space within you to allow someone else into your life, A teacher in his brilliance is sitting and learning, and there's times the student can't come over because the teacher has no room for anybody else. He's completely erein sof mamala kol hamitzias. So first he has to make a space within him that's going to allow for another to approach him. Like we know there are times that Rabbeim did not have yechidus because they were completely in their own world, and there's no space at that point. You need to make an asinus mokim. You need to create a mokim le'elamis, a mokim la'azulas, even before the zulas is there. So that mokim is already creating the idea of a zulas. Lifnei Tzimtzum, the zulas is shir asme b'keach, masha osid liyas bepeil, for instance. Like, the Maggid's example of the father that's mitzayer sudas haben, even before the ben was born. He's mitzayer. In his mind, he's imagining, that's where he types kach ola b'machshava. Machshavten she'yisrael kodmel chodoven, he gives that example. These are ideas where, now, all this atzmus doesn't need. Remember, Kol Yochli doesn't need any of this. But for us to make sense of it, the Eibishter wants to give us as many tools and handles to be able to grasp it to some extent, because he wants a relationship with us, and he wants us to retrace the steps. That's why you need these levels, not because the Eibishter needs to make a tzimtzum or that he needs his salmos. The teacher needs to do it because the only way he's going to communicate with the student. The Eibishter doesn't need to do anything, but he wanted it to be logical, a process, a step-by-step process that makes sense, that we can understand and we can retrace the steps, as we discussed many times. Okay.
But the bottom line is that after all this Tzimtzumim and the Kav and all the entire everything, I don't know how to say it. It's the reality of everything is the Eibishter. There's nobody else besides. The only thing is there is a feeling of a Hester, like there is a
Yeah, but that's the Aber. But the goal here is that we should see it the way the Abishter sees it. You forgot that little piece. It's what you just said is the emes, but the key is that we should see that emes, like in the lashon of the Maimer Basaligani, that in the Sheker Elam we should see this emes of Elikus. What you said is right, but we don't see it that way. That's the whole challenge.
my difficulty is in the V. Everything that you said makes a lot of sense.
What do you mean? God
But
created, He created existence.
so he created an existence beside him.
No, He created existence that does not see Him, even though He's there completely and He sees it and it's all part of Him. He concealed Himself. He has the power to be Mailim.
So who is the one that is having the alarm? I know you said it's us.
Who's the one that
But
what?
who is this
Who is the one that what?
that has to reach the reality? That
The
right
reality
now,
that is a result of the
who is the
Helam.
world?
The world is the
Who is the
result of the Helam of Elikus, is the world that we know. We don't know, however, that it's a Helam until we be mizbeinin on it. You could live in this world and think that there's no other reality except yourself. So this world has to come to realize that it's all a result of hein gvuresa, of God's concealment. And within this concealment lies plenty of Gili Elikus if you are mizbeinin. That's why we need Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad.
I'm sorry, you make sense. I'm sorry that I'm asking it. But the Nivroim are not a separate entity, right?
That's the truth, but we don't know that. We don't know that. So we have to come to discover that through our avodah. That's correct. We're not. But we don't know that. We're not aware of it. We don't feel it, I should say. That's why it's called Tachtenim.
The V is
You're
the
simply asking a
Eibishter.
simple question. Why is this world called Tachtenim? Do you understand why? So he says in Perek
this I understand.
Tanya, because
This I understand.
So that's what you're asking. Why are we called Tachtenim? Why aren't we called Elikus? Because Elikus is Behelim. And the Tachtenim means Begili Erein Sov Baruch Hu, Tachten Shein Tachten Matmen, and we don't feel it. And that's also real, because God concealed. From His point of view, it doesn't conceal anything. It's like you could see when you teach a child Aleph, you see all the seichel in it, but the student doesn't. This is the whole Shai Yichud V'Amunah. Shem Shemogan Hashem Elikim, Kayachat Tzimtzum. Like, you know,
So the student is really another entity, but we are not. The Bereshis Boro. What is the Bria? What is the Bria?
The Bria is you and I, our consciousness that exists. I don't understand your question. You and I right now sitting and talking is not an illusion. We exist. God created us. The fact that our existence is an extension of godliness, we don't feel that. So that is all reality. That's who we are. That's the we. Now, if you're so bottled to Elikus that you don't feel separate from God, then God bless you. Then Taka, there is no we. Then you're one with God. I'm not there on that level. Are you on that level?
You said before about from Memhei.
I'm saying, do you feel that you're just an extension of godliness and you have no other consciousness, nothing of your own?
My question is not about the feeling. My question is, who is the feeling? Who?
Your name is Shlomo Tachtel. My name is Simon Jacobson. That's the who.
Simon, before you mentioned about the Memhei, that before the Tzimtzum Rishon, there were Tzimtzumim. What does that mean? Before Tzimtzum Rishon?
I don't want to discuss it right now. It's a whole different, it's Tavshin Memhei Yud Shvat time. You can look it up there. It's a whole different, it's not really for here. It'll just confuse matters. I don't think it's a contradiction to what it says here, because at the end of the day, what the chiddush here is that even the rotzen for Elamis is mushrish and atzmus mamish. It's not mushrish in the rotzen for gili etzema er. That's the key thing he wants to say.
Rabbi Jacobson, if I may, and I could be wrong with what a rabbi is trying to say, and actually sometimes my question too, is that everything else is a creation. There's a creator and creation. But when it comes to neshamot, it's chelek mamash, right? So we're literally part of God. It's not a creation. It's not a creation in a classical sense. I think that's what Rabbi Tequila is trying to convey.
I don't think he's talking about. I don't think he means that.
Oh, okay.
No, he's not talking about that. I mean, he could talk for himself, but I don't think he's talking about that. It's a different question you're asking. Am I correct, Rapstein?
No.
You're not talking about that.
I did. That was my question.
Oh, so why didn't you say that you're talking about the neshama now?
No. I'm talking about the physical.
So he's
world.
saying, no, George is saying that you asked about, what you mean to ask is about chelik elikam mal mamish. I don't think that's what you're asking.
No. That's
Okay.
not my question.
The chelik elikam mal mamish is another discussion that also deserves to be discussed. What I would say is, at the end of the day, for all practical purposes, it's still a chelik elikah. It's not elikah. It's still a creation at the end of the day. Even here, on the contrary, here he said even creation is not a creation, it's his galus. So chelik elikam mal mamish is simply that God God imparted part of his godliness into a soul, like this child, like a son, like a child from a parent. That's what he says in Ayin Beis in Tanya. But that doesn't contradict anything we're saying here, because we are still a creation. At the end of the day, everything but God is a creation, even the neshama at the end of the day. But he's not really distinguishing neshama and guf here, because the neshama feels godliness. A neshama does feel that it's an extension of and a part of. Here he's clearly talking about more of a state. So I think for all practical purposes, here he's talking about God and everything else, including the neshamas. So the next piece, let me see here, how much more we're going to go. I'm going to read two more lines. Ukamoi Cain. So just like it is with the moshel of the Mashpia and the Mekabel, that the Chitzenius is part of the Pneumius, it's only his galus, Yeser. Ukamoi Cain, klolas inyan Isavus. Same thing, the general Hisavus creation, Gamba Ashara Bekeach. Also the way he envisioned it before the Tzimtzum, Hurak Bechinis is Galus Levad. Is only an expression, a revelation alone. But everything is encompassed and united in utter seamless unity in the source. So it's only come as from God's point of view, he's just revealing a part of himself, so to speak. So just like he's revealing a part of the higher level of Gilui is Gilui la'atzmei, what he called the Gilui mina etzem. That's not a mokal yesh, here is the Gilui ershi, a mokal yesh. Galus Levad. Which is interesting. That means that he sees existence as just an expression of himself, but a revealed expression. Before existence, it wasn't even revealed. Now it's revealed expression. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Yeah. I'm going to stop here. And hopefully tomorrow we'll learn till the end here, but yeah. So in other words, when we come to appreciation of God's perspective, existence is simply a divine expression It's a divine piece of art, so to speak. That's just an expression of the divine, but we are not there yet, because then the Tzimtzum is going to come and separate God's visioning existence from the higher level of the Ayin beyond existence. And it's our mission through Yichud, through Hashem Echad, to come to appreciate that existence, all it is an expression of the divine. So essentially, from our point of view, it's Yesh Ma'ayin, because the Yesh and the Ayin have nothing in common. But from God's point of view, the Yesh, the Savas HaYesh, is just another expression of his Ayin. Interesting. Is he trying to say that from God's point of view, you don't call it Ayin to Yesh? It's not a Yesh. All it is a extension of the divine. I don't think that's what he's saying. Okay, we need more discussion and thought on this. I will also say, this morning I gave a shir in the Kollel on Basiligani for Yud Shvat on chapter 14, and some of these themes are related. The theme of Helam and Gilui and Helam Atzmi. So that class may be helpful if you want to listen to it. I can post a link on our group. Okay. Yeah. Yesh la'ayin b'chol zeh. There's a lot to unpack here. I'll try my best to do that. Yeah. Okay. So let's stop here by this